You heard just a little bit of personal information from Bill. I graduated seminary in 2000. I spent 2 years in Nebraska Lutheran High School, where I found out I really love working with high school kids. It was about 100 students. 70 of them lived in the dorm. I was still wearing that single man hat that Pastor Warnicki talked about, and so without many other responsibilities at home, I literally spent my entire day, except for when I went to sleep, with high school students, and I really come to enjoy working with them. After those 2 years, I was reassigned to Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Appleton, where I've spent the last 10 years, and we had 125 high school kids, more in the congregation than there were at the high school, and we were very close to Fox Valley Lutheran High School, so I spent a lot of time with our high school kids and really with everyone in the area, continuing to work with them. And in the last 2 years, I would say, maybe the last 3 years, I realized that I wanted to spend even more time with young high school boys who are maturing into men. And I think the biggest reason is that I saw a great need within our church and in our world and in their personal lives to learn what does it mean to be a Christian man. And in fact, I'll just tell you up front, most of the material that we're going to work through today, some of you have seen last year before I left Appleton, as you heard, I now serve at Kettle Moraine Lutheran High School. I ran a 15-week session called Men's Fraternity to answer that very question. What does it mean to be a Christian man? And we had a couple of college-age guys there, but mostly older men. And the feedback I heard from many of them were, I wish I had this when I was younger. And so now I have the opportunity to work with high school students, and I especially work with a group at Kettle called Cross Trainers, and it's really an opportunity for, it's boys and girls, but for all of them to learn what does it mean to be a Christian leader and follower, because they all have a little bit different roles. And it was my privilege to bring 3 of those guys here today. What I want to talk about today is how do we continue to learn to be both a leader and a follower in a mentor relationship. And I'll end up going back and forth between a more formal mentor relationship, which is really what the material was discussing, but also maybe a less formal, a more informal peer mentor relationship. And what I want to do is explain the value of that, the need for it, what does it look like, and then how do you pursue it. Why don't we begin with prayer? Dear Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to gather together today as Christian men, and especially to gather together around your word and to ask you, what do you have for us to learn? What would you have us to believe? What would you have us do? How can we live out our Christian faith as we follow the servant leader, the master servant leader, Jesus? We ask that you'd be with us today as we especially discuss the opportunity to have other men influence us and to be an influence to the other men that you place into our lives. Send your Spirit to us today, Lord, to give us wisdom and guidance, but then also desire and ability to carry out your will in our lives. You guys can say amen. Amen. I think I just went to the end. No. All right. In your sheets, you can fill it out if you want. You don't need to. It's just something to kind of follow along to keep us on track a little bit. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, I'll be, again, honest with you. I am not an expert about mentoring. I have had any number of mentors in my life, and I will share some of that with you. But some of you have more experience. I see Pastor Krause back there who works with our institutional ministries, and there's a formal mentoring program. Pastor Zillow just told me he's in that program. I know I saw Trinity before. He was part of that program as well. So some of you may have more to offer. Please feel free to just raise your hand, speak up, and share with us what you know or what you have experienced. So I flipped ahead. Maybe you saw the answer already. But what do you think? Every man needs you would think a woman in his life, and that's true. And that's true. And I hope and I pray that I'm not misapplying Genesis 2:18, but today I'm going to propose to you that every man needs a man in his life. We have a natural desire for the opposite sex, and that's a different kind of relationship. What I want you to realize today is the power of having another man in your life and the power of being a man in someone else's life. And we'll use the word mentor and we'll define that, but that's what we're really going to talk about today. And God said early on, right after he had created the first man, it's not good to be alone. And he went on to create Eve and present him and institute marriage in Genesis 2:24 when God says, we'll leave our father and mother and be united to our wives. But all along the way, from the time that we're born until the time that we die, men are still an important part of that life. And I think that we often let it happen. And we're not intentional about those male relationships. In fact, maybe sometimes we're even a little shy about them because we don't want to give the wrong impression about what that relationship looks like. And we'll talk a little bit more about that too. There are really 3 significant relationships that we all have in our lives, at least the first 2, and I'm encouraging the third. The first one is your dad. I certainly don't know all of you. I don't know what your relationship is like with your dad. I do know that some of you have an awesome relationship with your dad, and maybe it's been like that your whole life. Maybe you had a rocky time with your dad. Maybe it was your high school years and you were in that rebellious stage, or you were fighting for independence and you wanted to be your own man. And you didn't need your dad, your old man, telling you what to do anymore. Maybe now it's better as an adult. Maybe you're estranged. Maybe your dad's in heaven. Maybe your mom and dad got divorced and he's far away. It matters, but whatever that looked like, your dad has an influence on who you are today. Right? I always remind my high school kids, you may not like it, but you will grow up to be like mom and dad. Right? And we have both sides. We have characteristics and tendencies from both. Some of that's genetic. Most of it's modeling. And most of it's the reality that what you saw as a child, even when it wasn't a sit down and let me teach you something, son kind of lesson, whatever you saw, that's who you will most likely become unless you consciously make a change, for better or for worse. And realistically, because your dad was definitely a sinful man and prayerfully also a Christian man, he had both positive and negative traits. Right? So there are some things you learn from your dad that make you the man that you should be, that you want to be. And there are some things that you might have learned from dad that you have to consciously say that, you know what, that wasn't good. I need to follow a different path. So it might do you some good. It's not really the focus of our discussion today, but it might do you some good to go home later on and just think about what did I learn from my dad? I'm seeing mostly older guys with us today. Not high school students might have trouble doing that. But once you get out of high school, out of college, as you become an adult yourself, you're a little bit more able to look back and realistically analyze that relationship. There might be some pain there. There might be something that you don't really want to think about. I'd encourage you to work through that too. But sit down and just make a list. What did my dad teach me? Good, bad, or otherwise? And then make a conscious decision to say, you know what, these are the qualities in my dad that I appreciate. I'd look at my dad and I would say hardworking. I mean, my dad got up and went to work every single day, and when he came home, he was tired, but he provided for our family. As a child, that was his main role. My dad, I don't remember sitting on the floor playing with me. When my dad played catch, he had the dad chair. I don't know if your dad has that chair. My dad's got the chair. It doesn't matter if it's inside the house most of the time, or we always went to the trailer. We had a little place in Little Green Lake, a little trailer. My dad had a chair out there too. And so when we play catch, my dad would sit in his chair. We'd play catch. Maybe like 4 times in my life, we went out and actually he hit the ball to me and I could chase after it. I mean, that wasn't my dad. He didn't do that stuff. I made a conscious decision. I like the hard-working part, but I'm going to play with my kids. Right? And they ask when I go home. My kids are 6 and 4. So when I go home, Daddy, will you play with me? And I, as often as I possibly can, I say, yes, I will play with you. Because I think that's important, right? My dad was hardworking at his job. He was a truck driver, but I never saw my dad do the dishes. I never saw my dad do laundry. I never saw my dad run the vacuum cleaner. I remember once when my mom was gone for a week, and my dad literally asked someone, how do you boil water? Not kidding. So we could make macaroni and cheese, right? So I made a conscious decision. I think my wife needs that attention. So she does the laundry because she's there all day long to do that stuff, but I always do the dishes when I'm home for a meal, right? So when we eat, if I'm home, I will do the dishes. That's kind of like my job. When I'm home, I will always give the kids a bath because my wife is taking care of them most of the other time, right? So you look back at the relationship, what's good, what can you mimic, what are some things that you might want to do differently? That is, I think, the most important influence or the most significant, most impacting influence that you will have on your life. Be conscious about thinking of it. The second one are your friends, right? And this happens as you probably at puberty in your middle school years, and then as you get into high school, it becomes more and more important. As you strive for that independence, you're breaking away from your parents, and you kind of put on the earmuffs and say, I don't really want to listen to what they have to say, and even other adults. Right, every single day I'm doing my best to pour this wisdom into these high school students, and it's just like, okay, tell me what I have to learn for the quiz. I'll try to get the best on the quiz. Half of them think that. The other half say, well, I'll get a 71 so I can pass your class, and then I'm out of here, right? And you're like, but you need to learn this stuff, but they don't want to hear it right now, right? There are times, but for the most part, so their influence are, what are their friends saying? And you can add media and all the other outside influences in there. But it's a different kind of influence, because now it's a little bit of blind leading the blind. There's a lot of positive to your friend relationships. The support, the encouragement, the mostly unconditional love that they have accepted you. But there's not always a lot of experience and wisdom. So there's something lacking. In steps what I think is the third one that we need, and that's the mentor. And as I said, we're going to talk about mentor from two different viewpoints. One is the more formal relationship, which would add back in another man who is not your dad, but is older than you. Not necessarily, and I think that's next actually, not necessarily old, we'll get to that. Not necessarily old, but older, who then has wisdom and experience that you don't have simply by living life and having gone through some of that. Before we get too far ahead, let's talk about what's missing if you don't have a mentor. Why is this important? And I want to be a little careful. I don't want to imply that if you haven't had this relationship until this point in your life, that somehow there's something wrong with you. Okay, that's not what we're talking about. I was talking about what's the value that this kind of relationship could add. And we're looking at it from reverse. What's missing without it? A social, emotional, and spiritual loss that results in these four things. The first thing is a warped perspective on life. Proverbs 14 says there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Now, sometimes that's just our sinful nature. Very often, it's our sinful nature that is feeding us false information that leads us down the path of sin and then to death. But you just think about your own thoughts when you're all by yourself. Right, last night, my family decided, since I wasn't going to be home all day long, that they'd go back home to Appleton, and that way my wife can have some help with her mom, and the kids get to see grandma and all this. So I got home last night after teaching all day. We had basketball practice and all these things, and it's an empty, dark, kind of lonely house. And so other than turning on some other noise like the TV or the radio, it's just me and my thoughts. You have those moments. I know they might be rare in your life now, but when you have those moments, what do you think? What do you honestly think about yourself? We tend to go to two extremes. Either we think really highly of ourselves and we spend our time thinking, what's wrong with all of those people? Right? What's wrong with my boss? What's wrong with the other employees? What's wrong with all these other people that are making my life miserable? Or we go to the other side and say, what's wrong with me? Why can't I do this or do that? Why don't I have these gifts or those gifts? Why is life so difficult? And when we're left with our own thoughts, we tend to dwell on the wrong things, and we can get stuck with the blinders on, right? With limited vision, and really not see the big picture. Or maybe we're stuck in a situation, or maybe we're struggling at work, and we don't see how the boss is actually trying to help us. Or we don't see how the other people, while they might not know everything they're supposed to do, they're doing their best. We just see the problem. Right? So sometimes we need someone else to give us a little bit broader perspective. Loose living. Proverbs 18:1. It's really interesting. I didn't include it, but if you go home tonight, look in your Bibles. Take a look at, this is the first verse, obviously, of this chapter. Look at the last verse. They're contrasts. They're almost opposites. And this verse is the negative. the last verse, I think it might be 24, 20-something, says that there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother, right? But this is what happens when you don't have that person. An unfriendly man pursues selfish ends. He defies all sound judgment. This is really just the result of a warped perspective. What do I want to do tonight? Well, I'm all alone. I've got nobody around. And, well, maybe I'd like some company. I could call up my buddies, or maybe I connect with an old flame, right? Or maybe I'm just going to go hang out at the bar and I'll just have a drink or two, right? Or maybe I'll see what's on TV, but I'm going to check out what's on HBO late night, right? Or maybe I'm going to surf the net a little bit, and when that one pop-up comes up, maybe just this time I'll click on it, right? Because we don't have anybody else around us to change our thinking or show us the perspective, we get caught in those sinful ruts and we end up pursuing sinful acts, right? And maybe those are some of the extremes, but it's easy to get a little off path, and without anybody else to get us back, it can really veer pretty far down the road. Loss of motivation for life's noble things. I see this in my high school kids. There's this one kid in my class who the other day I just asked him. I just said, what are your dreams? This kid, he's a junior in high school and he's given up. Right? He does nothing. He sits there in class. He takes zero notes. He pays zero attention. And I know it's school, and I know not every, you don't always like school. Right? But most of the kids at least want to do enough to pass. Right? So I just ask, what are your dreams? Because I can't figure out a way to motivate this kid. I mean, I've railed on him, and I've brought him to the office, and I've encouraged him, and I've gone hard and soft, and I don't know. And somewhere along the line, he doesn't have a desire for life's noble things. He's lazy. He wants life to be easy. Well, that's not how it's going to be. Right? It's even the case with kids who are a little bit more active. I help coach freshman basketball, and one of our toughest things all season long has been, do you guys have that inner fire to work harder than the other team so that you can win? Or are you just happy to be out there and, well, as long as we're out here and we have the ball, then we'll play. You know, like, if you want, I told them, if that's what you want, go to church Sunday night and play rec ball. But if you want to be on a team and put on a uniform and play with another group of guys and have refs and compete, then you got to find some inner desire, right? It's a desire for something more. I'm not content with however it is now. I always am looking to improve, always looking to get better. It's very difficult to do that all by yourself, to self-motivate. Loss of opportunities for transparency. You remember transparencies? Like a high school kid has no idea what a transparency is, right? They're like, what's that? Right? You can see through it. Is there anybody in your life that can see through you? I mean, do you have anybody, maybe your wife, right? But there are things that maybe you don't want to talk about with her. Maybe there's something going on between you and your wife and you've got nowhere else to go. Is there somebody that can see? When somebody asks you, so this happened, since I had moved, I'm seeing all these people that I haven't seen for a while. How's it going? What's always the answer? Good, right? And that's just being cordial because they probably don't really want to know. I mean, they kind of do, but when you're just passing, you don't have half an hour to, go into everything. But if you got together with a buddy, right? If you said, hey, let's go have dinner together, let's get a drink together. How's it going? Would you really tell them? Or would you just talk about, Charles Woodson got released, and what are the Brewers going to look like this year, and it's still cold, and work, you talk about, it's business, right? We're really good about business, even if it's the business of life. Is there anybody that can see through you and say, I don't think you're telling me the whole story. It seems like something's wrong, right? How's your marriage? How are you doing as a dad? How's your social life? Do you get any time to relax and rest, or you go? We miss that without another guy in our life. We need a band of brothers. It's the greatest thing about this ministry, and an opportunity if nothing else, I know that you probably came and you know a few people here, and maybe if you're involved in certain things, you have a wider network of people that are here. But just to come and sit in a room, wasn't that cool this morning? Just to sit there with that many guys and to actually hear men sing. I love it, because when we go to church, half the guys don't sing, right? And just to hear those male voices singing, led by an awesome band, and to be encouraged. This is what we need every day in our life. And you can't come to a conference every week, but you need a small group. Maybe not 400. Maybe it's 2 or 3 or 4 that can encourage you regularly as needed. There's power in this room. That one video about with Shep, where he said the energetic, enthusiastic. I tend to be animated and loud. And they said, well, they'll tell us we're all leaders. I'm like, I can't say that. Better not say that. But you are. You may not be a leader as an official title, right? You may not be the president of your congregation or the chair of some committee. You may never have the title. But because you are a man, you are a leader. If you're married, you are a leader in your home to your wife. If you're a father, you are a leader to your children. This isn't a matter of choice. We are all followers of Christ. I understood the point of the video, but we are also leaders of others with God-given responsibility. As a pastor or a teacher, I have a call to lead a specific group of people, right? You may be a leader in your work life. You may be a leader in your social life. Maybe you're the one that organizes all the get-togethers or whatever. There are different aspects of your life where you are a leader. Today, I want to encourage you to be both a leader and a follower, but I want to encourage you to be a leader to another man in a formal or informal way, however you decide. But there is power that God has given you to influence another man. And we have to realize how God has created us. We heard that in another video this morning, to connect to each other, right? We're not the DIY guy. We can do everything on our own. We kind of like to think that. It makes us feel good on one half, but the other half is lonely. And we all need somebody else to do this for us, and we all need to do it for somebody else. The reality is, your pastor can't touch every guy in your congregation, right? The leaders of your congregation can't touch everybody. The leader of your children can't touch everybody. We need to touch each other in small ways. That's the power that we have right here. All right, so I mentioned earlier that one way, this is probably the more formal way of looking at a mentor relationship, is to have someone who is older. And not old. It's not an age thing. This is talking about someone who has gone ahead of you, right? Who has walked in the path that you are about to walk. So every single one of you has gone to high school, right? For the most part. So you have the ability to share what you learned with somebody else who's in high school, right? Every one of you has gone through grade school, and you have the same thing with that different age. If you're a husband, you can help somebody else who's just getting married if you've been married for more than a year, right? And the wider the gap, sometimes the more experience there is to share. There's vision in words. I think the easiest ways to mentor somebody is to simply share encouraging words with them. And it may never be, this is more of an informal opportunity. I've got these 3 boys with me today, and we drove my little Saturn up here, and the best thing about that is they're close enough that they can't get to the back of the vehicle and just talk amongst themselves while I'm driving. They're going to have to talk to me, and they're okay with that. But I'm going to get to ask them today, what'd you hear? What'd you like? What made you uncomfortable? Are you interested in coming back again? I will tell them one thing no matter what they say. I'm proud of you for coming. I said the same thing to you guys, right? 3 high school boys took time. They took off work. They took off their day of rest. They could have slept in this morning, and they came simply because they were invited. I'm proud of them. They need to hear that, right? And then, as I hear their responses, I get to find out from them what are their hopes and dreams, and I get to help them see that they can maybe do things that they didn't think they could do. So yesterday, I gave an assignment that my students didn't like very much. They just got done with this personal Bible study project. They read the first 8 chapters of Romans, and I broke it down into 19 sections. And they had to, what I call SOAP, and I stole that from one of my mentors, Rick Lowen. SOAP stands for Scripture, Observation, Application, Prayer. It's just one method of personal Bible study. So they had to do this SOAP for these 19 sections of Romans. That was hard enough. But God forbid they actually read and think about the Bible. We haven't asked them to do that a lot, by the way. So I'm asking them to do that. But the next thing is, for lack of a better way of describing it to them, I'm asking them to write a chapel devotion. And so every day we have chapel at school, and it's 6 to 8 minutes of delivering a message. All right? They're all familiar with this. But I told them, if you're going to deliver the chapel, you have to write it. They're all going to write it. I said you can either deliver it as a chapel, where you're going to just deliver the message, or you can create a discussion out of it. I said, but if you're going to deliver it as a chapel, no books, no notes, no paper. Oh, how are we supposed to do that? The teachers don't even do that. Nobody does that. It's time to learn, right? It's time to learn. And after we can get past all the whining and complaining because you're actually asking us to work in class, then it's a matter of, you know what? You can do it. I will teach you how to do it. Oh, but you're trained and you went to this seminary, and how do you expect us to do it? I said the first time I did it, it wasn't easy for me either. Right? You have to get out of your comfort zone. So in the midst of all the complaining, I'm trying to help them see this is something you can do. And here's why we're going to do it. You may never give a chapel, although I'm hoping that my junior boys, once they do this, will be more likely to do it next year as seniors. But if you're going to be a parent, I want you to learn how to talk to your kids about Jesus. Are you going to get out your note cards and say, okay, son, now we're going to study the story of Lazarus. Okay, well, let me look at my card. No, you need to learn how to just talk to them, right? Maybe you'll end up being in ministry someday or just vacation Bible school or Sunday school. There's lots of opportunities. You can do this. Paint a picture for somebody. There's a lot of power there. And then the wisdom of experience. As I mentioned, if you've gone through something, experience does not make you an expert, does it? Just because you went through it, just because you're married, doesn't mean that you know everything, you have all the answers about being married. Right? Everybody told me this when my kids were born. As soon as you have a child, the first thing I did at least was I started asking everybody else, how do you? Right? How do you get that kid to stop crying? The first night my daughter was home, the first night, and mind you, my wife is a nurse. She cried for so long that my wife said, call 1-800-NURSE, right? And I called 1-800-NURSE. Hello, this is the nurse hotline. How can I help you? I said, we just got home with our daughter. She's brand newborn, and she's been crying, and she won't stop crying. We don't know what to do. Sir, how long has she been crying? It's been like an hour and a half. Sir, babies cry. If it gets to be 3 hours, call me back. Are you kidding me? You didn't tell me how to stop the crying, right? Later on, it was sleep. How do we get these kids to go to sleep, right? You constantly, because you're not, and what does everybody say? Well, there's no book on parenting, right? We don't have all the answers. Okay, but I don't need all the answers. Just tell me what you did, and I'll try that, right? We're willing to take the experience. Share your experience. Sometimes I've seen men, now I will go to the older side, who are in retirement, and they feel like they've got nothing to offer. Right? They've used their gifts and abilities, and they've put it into the workforce, and they volunteered in the church, and they served in all these ways. And sometimes I see those men step off to the side and say, well, now it's time for the younger men of the congregation to step up and to fill those roles. And there's some truth to that, but stepping off to the side is different than stepping out of the picture, because those men have experience to offer. If nothing more, in encouragement and advice, and here's what I did, and I can learn from that. And you can share that. All right, let's try to define a mentor a little bit more. Before we do that, I'm just going to give you a 2-minute break here to find someone next to you, and I want to see if you can come up with a definition before I give you one. And I'm not going to really give you a succinct definition. I'm just going to give you some principles or ideas. But why don't you take a minute or two, and then I'm going to ask you, if you're willing to share, what do you think is a mentor? So we can clarify the word. Go, 2 minutes. All right, let me bring you back. I have to tell you, I always love these presenting opportunities with adults, because when I ask you to talk about something, you actually talked about it. As opposed in the classroom when I say like, okay, 2 minutes, they're like, oh, finally, we can get back to our conversation from the hallway. Like nobody actually talks about it. So I'm encouraged by your participation. Thank you. Are you willing to share? What is a mentor? Respected. Okay, respected, honest, tells the truth, listens, encourages. That's what I heard you say. Sound about right? Is that your grandpa? Good, great guy to have around, right? Anybody else? Okay, someone with experience, and sometimes general experience is very nice, isn't it? But there are times in your life where you need someone with the experience where you're going right now, right? When I was looking for someone to help me figure out how to make that child stop crying, I didn't go back and ask my dad, my mom's in heaven now, because he doesn't remember, right? I asked somebody whose kids are like 2 years older than mine, and they just went through that stage, right? So you're looking for somebody who has the experience of what you're about to enter or what you're in the middle of, right? Also, you said someone that you can trust. Right? That's pretty important that when somebody shares something with you, and you might trust them because of the relationship already established, if it's your grandpa or an uncle or a family friend that's there, or maybe you trust them because you've watched that person, and you don't know them personally, but you think that what you're looking for, they're doing that well, right? You see somebody who has, well, it looks like you have a great marriage. Not that there are no problems, but I see the way you interact with your wife, and I want to learn more about how do you do that. Right, so you might trust them kind of based on what you see. All right, let's just go a few things. Anybody know who Mentor actually was? It's from the story of the Odyssey, which I have to admit I've never read the whole story. All right, but Ulysses goes on this trip, like the Trojan War type trip, and he's going to go on this war. And Telemachus is his son, and he wants somebody to take care of his son while he's gone. And he asks his friend Mentor. All right, so that's where the word comes from. It was the name of the man who took care of Ulysses' son when he went away. All right, took responsibility for him. Couple of things. Again, this is not to be an exhaustive list. I think the things that are already mentioned, you could create your own list. This is just a few things that are important things to think about. Number one, supports rather than competes. When it comes to the peer-mentor relationship that I'll mention in a couple of minutes, it's going to be very easy to look to a friend. But if you're looking to a friend who is going to compete with you, it may be difficult to encourage you, right? If you're on the basketball team and you both want to be the point guard, that might not be the time to try to mentor each other. It's kind of like Brett Favre mentoring Aaron Rodgers, right? And not to pick on old scars, but I remember Brett Favre saying, I'm not here to teach him. He can learn by watching me. Something like that. And that was probably fair. It sounded kind of harsh, right? But it wasn't Brett Favre's job to teach the next guy. That wasn't his job. Now, he could have maybe helped the guy out a little bit, but that wasn't his job, right? And I think Aaron did just fine on his own. So when you're in those competing positions, it might be kind of tough. Cheers rather than criticizes. This is one of my difficulties. I am critical. And my wife reminds me often, it's not what you say, how you say it, right? And I have to really pay attention to this in my parenting and in my teaching. And sometimes with all the right passion and zeal and good intentions to help somebody, it just rips them apart, right? So we have to be careful of how we're encouraging, that it's actually encouragement and not just criticizing. And that's important not just in what I say, but how does that person receive it? Right? Communication is always a two-way thing. And if that person feels criticized, I can spend all day long saying, well, I didn't criticize you, you just took it that way, but it doesn't help. If I'm talking to a player on the basketball team and they feel criticized and they shut down, it doesn't help the team, even if it wasn't my fault. All right? So you want to look for someone who has the right mindset that they're going to encourage you and not just rip you down. Encourages the development of your gifts. Someone who can see potential in you. This is back to the vision of words. Someone who, my wife and I, we watch one TV show every week together, Biggest Loser. And part of it's because we both like diet and exercise and being healthy. But part of what I like the best about that show is it's transformational. And it comes across very clearly on the show. It's not just a physical thing. it's an emotional thing, and as a believer and as a Christian, I know it's really a spiritual thing, and they can't portray that on the show, and I don't know if they talk about that or not. But that's what we want to see in somebody's spiritual life, right? Is transformation. And to be able to look at somebody and say, I see potential in you. You can do this. You can encourage them and see those gifts that they might not see on their own. Protect you from mistakes. This is where I heard somebody over here say maybe a mentor can be someone who's failed. Absolutely. Right? If I've done it the wrong way, I can tell you how to do that. So we're doing evaluations for our basketball team. We're at the very end of the season, and the head coach handed out an article that was written by a former high school and college basketball player, and it was 7 mistakes I made as a player. So there's a guy, he wasn't a failure by any stretch of the imagination. He played Division II, and his school eventually became Division I college basketball. He was a good basketball player, but looking back, he said, here are 7 things I wouldn't do. To give that to a freshman basketball player and say, here's a perspective of a guy that's in a place that you might want to go, avoid these things. Like, don't pay attention to all your stats versus the things that aren't on a chart, like taking a charge or setting a screen, the intangible things. Right? So we can learn from people who have done something, whether it was wrong or misguided, but they can say, don't follow into that trap. Recognizes your value and potential. I think I talked about that with encouraging the development of your gifts. Not necessarily a friend, not that it can't be a friend, but a confidant. This is that trust factor, right? That you feel like I can tell you what I really think. I don't have to give you the right answers. I don't have to give you the answers that I think that you want. I can just tell you what I really think. And number 1, I know you'll still love me. And number 2, I know that you will listen and process and maybe help me to dig deeper. And very often, I need to come up with my own answers. I mean, almost all the mentors that I have had, they haven't given me the answers. They've listened and they've asked questions because there wasn't really one answer. It was for me to figure out. But you need to be able to trust that person, that they're not going to misuse that information. And it's not just about telling everybody else, but that they're not going to use it against you, hold it against you. Some examples from the Bible. You guys know any of these? Who was Moses' mentor? We could see Aaron a little bit, but it was actually a little bit probably reversed because Aaron was more like the helper to Moses. Jethro, Moses never said, hey, Jethro, will you be my mentor? But Jethro realized Moses was overworked. And Jethro was the guy that told Moses, it was his father-in-law, said, Moses, you got to quit doing this all by yourself. You need to get other people, you need to delegate and get other people to listen to the complaints and let them take care of it. And if there's a really big one, then they can bring it to you. But you can't be listening to everybody. I just went through this yesterday, not Jethro, but I'm teaching this to my freshmen. We're in the book of Numbers. And God actually told Moses the same thing a little bit earlier. All the people were complaining they wanted meat. And so God sent them quail. But then God said, you need 70 elders, because Moses said, how am I supposed to do this? Because get 70 guys to help you. Jethro kind of helped Moses put that into practice. Moses then mentored Joshua. Moses took the people up to the border of the promised land. But because of an earlier incident, God said, you're not going to get to go in. And Joshua was his right-hand man. And so he mentored Joshua. You know who mentored Elisha? Elijah, right? And at the end of Elijah's life, when the chariots of fire took him up, he said, what can I do for you? And he said, give me the Spirit. Give me twice as much of the Spirit as you have. And he got it. The next one's easy, right? Who mentored the 12? How did Jesus do that? How did that relationship look? What was Jesus' mentoring style?
A ton of modeling.
A lot of modeling, right? Jesus took time to teach. Right? There were times when, you think of Jesus would tell a parable and the 12 disciples were like, Jesus, we really don't know what you were talking about. Can you explain that to us? And so he'd take them off to the side and he would tell them things that other people didn't get to hear, right? Until it was recorded for us in Scripture. But almost all of it was just living together. Right? They did ministry together, they did life together, and the 12 watched. I really like that video with those are the skit guys, the guy with the Peter and Jesus, because they bring the Bible to life and they help you see some of the things that aren't recorded, and how Peter came to a realization, and that Jesus was just standing there. What did they say? Go and tell the disciples and Peter. And that happened a lot when you read through the Scriptures. The disciples, and sometimes it happened later. They didn't realize, I also, this time of year now, I like to watch The Passion of the Christ, and I like the flashbacks in that movie because it's the disciples, after Jesus is back in heaven, realizing, well, that's what he said, now I get it, right? And so it was a lot of just living life together. Barnabas was Paul's companion on the first missionary journey, but after that, they were going to go on a second journey, and they had a little disagreement about whether to take John Mark, because John Mark, who is the writer, Mark, of the gospel, he got homesick about halfway through the first journey, and he left, and Paul didn't like that. And so Paul said, I don't think we can trust him again. Barnabas did an absolutely amazing thing. Barnabas and Paul split. Barnabas said, you know what, Paul, why don't we just do our own thing? And Paul took Silas, and he went on another journey. And Barnabas said, I'm going to take John Mark. I'm going to take this kid under my wing. And I'm going to trust him and see what happens. You know what happened to John Mark? He not only went on that trip with Barnabas, we find out in 1 Peter that he served in Jerusalem at the home church. And Paul eventually comes to really value him, because as Paul is dying in a prison in Rome, and he writes 2 Timothy, he says, if there's one guy that I can see before I die, I want to see John Mark. Somebody tell him to come visit me, right? And then he writes the Gospel of Mark, so that now all of us still benefit from his ministry. All because Barnabas said, I'm going to spend time with this guy. And then the Apostle Paul to Timothy, the 1st and 2nd Timothy. And Timothy wasn't the only one. I mean, you've got Titus and Philemon, and Paul mentored all kinds of guys through his ministry. Here's Paul's definition of, he didn't intend it to be a definition, but I think that what Paul was saying to the Thessalonians describes one way of mentoring. We loved you so much that we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God. He's not downplaying that, right? He's saying, but we gave you that and our lives as well, because you became so dear to us. You know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, urging you to live lives worthy of God, the vision of words, calling you up to God's more noble purposes. There's something more in life than where you are today. There's always more, who calls you into his kingdom and glory. And Paul, in that letter, if you go back and read that, he talks about imitating a lot. I imitated Christ. You imitated me, Thessalonians, and now others are imitating you, right? In a sense, that's mentoring. We're going to live life together, and we're going to show each other how to do it. Everyone needs a mentor. I got 2 big points I want to leave here, and this is the first one. It doesn't matter how old you are. I think that if you're 70, you could still benefit from a guy who's 80, right? I think that there's always somebody ahead of you that can be your mentor, your encourager, right? And so it doesn't matter where you are in life. I think there's always a guy ahead of you. And I really want to talk about 3 positions. And I don't have this anywhere in there because I thought about this later. I read it later. That we need a guy ahead of us, a guy beside us, and a guy behind us. The guy ahead of us is that kind of more formal mentor, the guy with wisdom and experience who can teach us things. He may not necessarily be a friend, but he's a guy that we can trust and he can help us. The guy beside us is more like the peer mentor, but he's not just a friend. He is that friend, and there may be more than one, that will be honest with us, that will be transparent with us, or that we can be transparent with him, and he can see and say there's something going on, and we can trust him, right? And he can encourage us. He may not have the wisdom to share with us that the older guy does, but he can encourage us. And the guy behind us is the guy that's following us. Right, that's the guy that we mentor. I'll get to that in one second here. What kind of mentor do you need? I'm going to go through this kind of fast because it overlaps a little bit with some of those other characteristics. Someone who is older than you, I think we could say both, the ahead and the beside. So I don't want to limit it to just that. Someone with experience, we've talked about that. Someone who cares about you, and Pastor Warnicki brought this point out so well with the colonel, right? He cared. That was the whole point. Even though he is an officer and Pastor Warnicki's dad was an enlisted man, the colonel cared. You know, some people think that to work with high school kids, you need to be young, which kind of worries me. I'm 38. I'm by no means old. But in the high school kid's mind, I'm getting past that you can relate to me stage. And I'm like, I'm not sure why they called the 38-year-old guy to come teach high school kids, because if you have to be young, I'm at the edge, right? I'm Charles Woodson. I might be released next year because I'm just past that stage. But I don't think it's true. I think it helps. What's the most important quality you need to work with a high school kid? It's that one right there. You care about them. That's it. They don't need more friends. I mean, some of them do, but most of them got that covered. They don't need another necessarily adult supervisor in their life, right? They got mom and dad, they got teachers, they got all these people to supervise them. They just need an adult who cares. So let me challenge you, because I'm a youth guy. Let me challenge you to go to church tonight or tomorrow, Monday night, whenever you go, and find somebody who's younger than you and ask them how they're doing. Right? Just ask them. And what are they going to say? Fine, okay, good. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You asked. Ask them again next week. Ask them again the third week. Ask them every single week, and at some point they're going to tell you something. And they might tell you, hey, we won our game last night, or I finally got a date, or I went to a dance, or my parents are fighting and I don't know what to do. You don't know what they're going to tell you. But if you care and you ask, they will eventually tell you something. I think that's the more important thing. And I think that's true at all ages. It's not just teenagers, right? Someone who will encourage you, we talked about that. Someone that will hold you accountable. So let me just tell you quickly about the mentors in my life. And they're all different. Right now I'm in a pastor's coaching network by a man named Rick Lowen, who was a police officer for a long time. And then he did ministry in Arizona on the Apache Reservation. And he worked for WLCFS. Well, right now he is leading a pastor's coaching network. It's called Cross Train. And he is our mentor. He's got 3 groups. And every single month, I Skype with Rick Lowen. And at the very beginning, he had us fill out a sheet asking us what are our physical goals, because he encourages us to have a healthy lifestyle. What are our emotional goals, our relationships, and our spiritual goals, our personal devotion life. And the conversation's the same every month. At least it starts the same. How's your devotion life? How's your marriage? How's everything going with your children at home? How's your classroom? He just asks me every month, how am I doing? How are you? What's your eating look like? Right? And I have to tell him. I don't have to, but I really feel like he's going to come through the screen and pound me into the ground if I don't admit to him that I ate 5 cupcakes yesterday. And Rick, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't do that. I'll really work harder today in my workout. I'll burn off those extra calories. He doesn't threaten you, but you feel like you want to tell him because there's something inside that's, I need to tell somebody. And I know that when I tell him, he's going to forgive me and he's going to encourage me. And he doesn't ever say, well, here's what you need to do then. He asks, so what do you need to do? Rick, I haven't worked out for 3 months because I've been so busy. So what are you going to do? Okay, well, next week. What day? Monday. What time? Right after school, 3 o'clock. What are you going to do? I'll do chest. Okay, he just asks you. And he leads you to create your own answers. That's accountability. Rick Lowen got me connected to a nutritionist. My wife and I did this together. We started out with an hour, and we created a plan. She asked us, what do you want to do? You want to weigh something? You want to gain muscle? Do you want to bodybuild? Do you want to run a marathon? What do you want to do? We told her what we wanted to do. She created a plan, and every week for 10 minutes, we Skyped with her, and she asked, how did it go this week? And if we said, oh, we went to the Brewer game, and we ate at this restaurant, and this and this, she didn't say, well, how dare you? How dare you break my program? She said, how do you feel about that? And sometimes I say, I felt pretty good because I hadn't had a burger in a long time. I'm eating all this chicken. I wanted a burger. She's like, okay, right? It's up to you. It's up to you. But it's accountability. And so you have these people in your life that will do that. Part of our pastor's coaching network is to have a peer mentor. So each of us not only talks to Rick every month, but each other. We have one person. It's the same conversation on a weekly basis. How are you doing? It's actually, after you get past the fact that, is this confession time? It's really refreshing to just be able to dump some of that stuff on somebody and start fresh and move forward. How do you find a mentor? It starts with prayer. We ask God for guidance. Determine what you want to learn. Like I said, when I became a parent, I was looking for somebody to help me parent my little kids. Right? I'm always looking for somebody to help me do that because they're always changing. Looking for somebody that's been married before. I know some churches have set up programs where an experienced married couple mentors for a year newlyweds. All right? Maybe it's at work. Maybe you just want to figure out how to get into the next position, and maybe you need somebody. There's all different things. And then you have to ask. A couple different ways you could ask. Just, hey, would you be willing to meet with me? I don't know if it's too comfortable to come and say, would you be my mentor? that feels kind of that's kind of like the hand holding and the feelings and the hugs and all that stuff, right? It feels like, but hey, can we get together sometime? Right? Okay. I'd like to ask you a few questions. Maybe you tell them about what, right? I'd really like to know how you and your wife seem so happy together all the time. That's a compliment. Wow. I know we're not happy all the time, but somebody else thinks we are. That's kind of cool. Yeah, I'll be willing to. I don't know everything, but I'll tell you what I know, right? I'll tell you what I do, right? How'd you get your kid to stop crying or go to sleep, or whatever? You just ask. Sometimes they're going to say no. It's all right. Sometimes people don't have time. Sometimes they're intimidated. They really don't believe that they have anything to offer. That's okay. Ask somebody else. And this is maybe more for when I was thinking about high school kids, to get a group together. Maybe it feels more like those 3 guys today, maybe we go back and they say, hey, can we meet with you once in a while, once a month? And some of our sports teams do that. That might make it easier to start instead of one-on-one. All right? Everyone needs to be a mentor. Gives you value and purpose. I mentioned you're in your church and you don't know what you can do. You don't feel like you have the time or the gifts to be on some formal board, but you can ask somebody else how they're doing. You don't need some special gift to do that. You can just care about somebody else. You don't need to give them the answers. Like I said, just asking them, how are they doing? And let them tell you, what is it that they want in life? Okay? What are you working on these days? What are you trying to get done? And just say, hey, maybe I can help you. I'll just ask you every week, how's that going? You give me permission to do that? Sure, that'd be great. That would really keep me motivated, keep me on task. All right? It connects you with the body of Christ, like that video, right? We're made to be connected to other people. It uses your spiritual gifts and abilities. You have some. Maybe you don't know exactly how to make them fit into the service opportunities at your church, but you have some to share. And sometimes you get to share those specifically because you've lived them out in your life. And it gives you a chance to keep learning. You hear this all the time. I volunteered to be a mentor to somebody else or to go on this project or on that project, and I got more out of it than I gave. That's the way God makes it work, right? He gives us opportunity. And then there's satisfaction in helping others, knowing that people appreciate what we're doing. How do you become a mentor? It's the same thing, really, right? You start with prayer. What are your strengths? What do you have to offer? Be honest with yourself. Romans chapter 12, I think it is. Sober judgment. Don't think too highly of yourself that you're better than everybody else, but don't be so low on yourself either. Don't say to yourself, I have nothing to offer. That's not true. Okay? You have some. And nothing else, you have experience. What have you gone through that you might be willing or able to share with others? How much time do you have? Some of the more informal opportunities will simply be touching base with people and not setting up a formal time, or I'm going to Skype with you every month or every week, or we're going to go out for coffee. Maybe you're not able to do that, but I think that you all have an opportunity just as you meet people. There are some people you see every day or every week, right? You're in the same places. Those are some more informal opportunities. If you have a group of guys that you already hang out with, can you create within that group the time that you already spend together, some honesty and say, you know what, guys, I really love talking about Packers, Brewers, and weather with you, but I'd really like we're all married. I'd really like when we get together once a month or whenever we see each other to just be honest, how's your marriage going? And I'll start. I'll be the first one to tell you, here's what I'm struggling with. Okay? And that's not always big. We're on the brink of divorce. Well, how's it going this week? Pray and watch for opportunities. See where you think you can step in and form a group if that might be easier. Same principle there. Have a mentor. Be a mentor. I hope, if nothing else, that you realize today that there is value in being connected to other men, especially other Christian men, both ahead of you, beside you, and behind you. And I pray that you will look for opportunity to have other men influence you. Give somebody permission. Give somebody else permission to ask you how you're doing. And maybe return the favor for that person. And if you can find an opportunity to influence somebody else, it might start simply by establishing a relationship and asking, how are you doing? Pick somebody that's younger than you, somebody that just got married, some high school kid in your congregation. Maybe it's your friend's or your child's friend. Maybe it's your new son-in-law or that guy dating your daughter. Okay? And look for an opportunity. You don't have to ask, can I be your mentor? I want to teach you about life. Just ask them how they're doing. and let the relationship grow.